I thought it'd be fun to show you what my new updated reread books are. It's definitely changed a bit since the last video that I made about books that I'd reread. Beach read, I just recently have been getting the urge to reread, which I actually read this one like a while ago, but out of like all the Emily Henry stories, this is like the specific one that I've been thinking about a lot. I also think it'd be interesting because it was one of like the first romance books. Actually, I think it was the first actual romance book that I ever read. It was either that or Red, White, and Royal Blue, I'm not sure. But I think it'd be interesting to see how my opinion changes on it after I've read like so many other romance books. This is a contemporary romance and it is like somewhat lighthearted at some times, but it's also, I'd say it's more of like a vulnerable romance. I actually did like cry in this one quite a bit because it has to do with like family troubles and stuff. Like there's a bit of just like regular fiction in this book because it kind of dives into like what the girl's story is and her background. She goes to this beach house, which used to be her dad's, and she finds out that she has a neighbor next door, and this neighbor happens to be like her college rival, and he writes and she writes, like they're both authors, and they make this thing to where they have each other write a book in each other's genre, and they help each other with writing it by like taking each other on like little dates that are themed around like the type of genre that they're writing about. I'm just like remembering certain scenes from it and I'm wanting to dive back in and just like read those again, and I do want to start like from the beginning. The next book that I want to talk about is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I would reread this one simply because even though like I already know what happens in it, it was just so fun on the way there. Even for a reread, I feel like I'd be on the edge of my seat. This girl, Pip, is doing a school project and she decided to do it on this cold case that happened with two people who went to her school. It was a girl and her boyfriend who is the one who's accused of killing her. The main girl, Pip, starts investigating and she gets like kind of obsessed with this investigation. She starts a podcast about it. She ends up basically like finding out a bunch of stuff that they didn't know about the murder and like what actually happened. There is also some romance in it, which I did love the romance. It was like a nice subplot. This is one of those books that I'd reread because of how like much joy I was having, as I was like how much like of a good experience it was to read it. It's like a YA murder mystery too, so like it's not really scary, which is perfect for me because I don't really love super scary books, but it still like gave me chills sometimes. Like sometimes I was still like, oh my god, that's so creepy, and it was really fun because I was like trying to figure out what happened the whole time. And of course like with the reread that wouldn't be the case, but I feel like it'd be fun to reread it knowing what happens and like seeing all of the clues right there. This is also just one of my favorite books, so it's just like an obvious choice for a reread for me. Also, it's a trilogy and I read the other two books, Good Girl, Bad Blood, and As Good as Dead, and I loved both of those too. So it's like the whole trilogy is really good. If you haven't read it at least once, then I really recommend reading it. I think this is a great one to get people into the genre because that's how I was. Like before this book, I didn't read like any murder mysteries or anything, but this one made me realize that I actually love that genre so much. Like if it's done in a way that's not too scary, but then also just like if it's done in a way that's like really good, I love it. This is a recent read, Powerless. I think I would reread this book, or at least I would reread parts of it, because it was just like one of those ones that is so good and addicting to read, and I love like romantasy. I'd probably like skip all the information-y parts and just go to the romance scenes, which there are a lot of in this book. It's fun like already knowing a story and the chemistry and the background and everything, so that when you like go into whichever part of the book that you want to go into, you already know all of that, so you don't have to do like the usual build-up for when you're like reading a new book. That's why rereading sometimes is so great, because it's like if you're in a reading slump or something and you just want to get into a story immediately, sometimes it's like the reread books, you already know like all of the like kind of a little bit boring sometimes like building up information so that you can get to like the good stuff. Enemies to Lovers, fantasy. I think it's, yeah, it's YA. Six of Crows. I don't know when I'm gonna reread this, but I know I'm gonna reread it one day. My thing right now is that there are just so many books that like this is one where like I wouldn't just reread a part. Like I'd reread the entire thing. There are just so many like fantasy books coming out right now that like I haven't gotten to reread this one, and I read it. This is like one of the first books I read when I was getting back into reading, but this is one that like I was amazed at how good it was. I was like, this is like an amazing book. I'm so happy this is the first one I read, because like who knows, I could have possibly read one that I didn't really like that much and then not have even gotten back into reading at all. I think this might be maybe one of the first times that I've read a found family like this and just absolutely fell in love with found family. Like this book, oh my god, I was just obsessed with them. I literally have like stickers on my laptop inspired by this book. It made me also realize how much I loved a good heist book, like when this big like heist happens and they're trying to like accomplish something and it's like super high stakes and it's like just the right amount of stressful, you know? It's just like so good, so entertaining. Oh, the romance, I loved it. I love the romance. There were multiple romances because it's kind of like all the Six of Crows are like the main characters, even though in my head like 2 characters were kind of like the main characters for me. Whoa, the sun is out all of the sudden and it's literally giving me like a spotlight right now. I think the clouds are gonna cover it up soon, so I'm just gonna keep going like this. These characters, like how they're written about and stuff, I feel like it was just so good at making each character feel so real and complex, and I like loved all of them by the end of it. Like I just could not get enough of them. The Inheritance Games makes me so nostalgic. Like I remember reading this book, like I just clearly remember reading it, and I remember thinking about how like fast paced it was and how fast I felt like I was going through it. The chapters are super short and there's like always something happening. I would reread this one because of like, again, I had a great time reading it. The romance was also fun to read about. This book, it feels like it's almost a comfort book actually. This is about a girl who inherits $46.2 billion. She doesn't know the guy who she inherited from and she can't like ask him why he did it because he's dead now. But there's like certain things she has to do in order to get the money. So she has to like go and live in his house, which is now her house, and his like 4 grandsons live there and like all of his family, so she has to live with all of them for like a year without leaving for like more than 3 days at a time. There is a love triangle and there's like a bunch of games that this guy who passed on to her all this money, like he has a bunch of games and riddles he wants them to figure out, and the games are for her to solve them. The whole time you're like wondering why he chose her, but all the games are like they're for her to solve, but they're also for his 4 grandsons to solve. I just really like the vibe of like a big old house with like a bunch of people in it, and then like this girl like new to the environment and like not really having the same vibe as everyone else, but she's just going around like trying to solve riddles and like find clues and stuff, and then like the grandsons are helping her out with it. It was just like such a fun concept, and when I was reading it I just felt so like cozy and entertained and happy. This one is not, because one of them is the Cruel Prince, but I'll just say like, because this is one that's like a spin-off of that series, but I won't talk about that one yet. This one I would reread. I think I'd reread it when the next one comes out. I like this one the most, like towards the end. This has one of those romances that you just feel like you like when you're done with this book, like you feel like you need to know more. I want to go back and see like all the little moments between them. So this is one that I would definitely reread for romance purposes. I also love the world that it takes place in, but I would mainly reread it because the romance is just so good. I love the romance in these Holly Black like fae books. It's so high stakes, like dramatic, kind of like enemies, lovers, like back and forth. Just so good. The Cruel Prince is the OG like trilogy that I started with, where like this series, I loved it so much. And I would reread this book. I have reread it. There's nothing like this romance for me and like the world that it takes place in. I just think it's unique in so many cool little ways. I just love reading about it. I feel like this little Leigh Bardugo's little like quote up here really well describes it. It's like lush, dangerous, a dark jewel of a book. Like those are the vibes. Like it's like dark and like kind of fancy, but then also like whimsical and fairy vibes, and also a little bit gruesome. It is very much enemies to lovers, like literally that's like the trajectory of their relationship, and it's kind of all like back and forth at some points. It just like, it's a roller coaster of emotions that's so fun. I feel like I've used the word fun a lot because that's like one of my big requirements for a reread, is like I have to have a good time reading it. I have reread the Shatter Me series before, like parts of the Shatter Me series. I specifically brought out Ignite Me, the 3rd book, because this is the one that I would go to reread out of any of them, because this was just like my favorite one. This one, and I think the 4th one after this, Restore Me, they might be like my favorites. The 1st book I was like, it's okay, but I don't love it. But yeah, this one I definitely have reread parts of this one because the romance is just so good, and it's like such a dramatic romance. Like I just love a good fantasy, like super dramatic, high stakes, roller coaster of emotions romance. Like enemies to lovers, I just love it. I love it so much. This is like a dystopian world that's post and I mean during too, like war and everything going on. The main girl in it has a power where if she touches someone, she kills them. In the beginning of the book, she's like in a psych ward. She's journaling and it's just like you're in her thoughts in the beginning. It just says like, I'm not insane, crossed out a bunch of times. Like it's like kind of dark at the beginning, and then she gets out. Well, actually it's a little bit dark throughout, but she gets out of the asylum place that she's in. There's like a love triangle in the first one. She's basically now being used as like an experiment in the first book. This guy's trying to see like how useful she would be and like the extent of her powers and stuff. I really enjoyed this story, and I remember I just couldn't stop reading them when I was reading them. They're, oh my gosh, these are some of the best books to get out of a book slump, because I mean, especially if you're doing a reread, I feel like it's so easy to get lost in the story, especially like rereading the third one. Some mistakes were made. I have reread this before and I will reread it again because it is just so good. This is another one that I reread like bits and pieces of it. Last time I reread it, I actually kind of ended up reading a lot of it, but it's because it's like so, it like gets you right away and then you're just like in it. There's a lot of like ups and downs in this one. It's very like addicting to read. Like I just can't put it down when I'm reading it. This is a childhood friends to lovers, and then that trope where like they don't see each other. They only don't see each other and they're like in an argument for like a year where they're like not talking, and then they see each other again, and I just like the story is so sweet and cute and I love it so much. It's a YA romance. You Deserve Each Other is a second chance romance. This is about a couple who's actually like they're engaged. This is a story about them like repatching their love for each other and like actually making an effort to make it work, falling in love again. It made me feel so good, and it was also just like really funny. A really good mix of humor and like lightheartedness, and then just like intense like emotional things and scenes. Love in Other Words. This one is just so good. Like I want to reread it all the way through again, but I have went back and reread like bits and pieces of it because it's just like a really good story. It's one of those ones where it pulled at my heartstrings and it just made me feel so many things. I love the romance so much. Like I love the romance so much that like hurt as I was reading it. I was like, it's just like too real. Like it feels like too genuine, and the way that it's written too, like it's just like the perfect little pacing there, like ramping up and then like going back and forth between flashbacks. It's a childhood friends to lovers. They don't see each other for like 10 years and then they randomly run into each other at a coffee shop. It's packed full of like emotions and just like dramatics in the best way, you know? Those are all of the books that I would reread. If this is being uploaded the way that I think it is, then it's like day 2 of Bookmas. Every day from December 13th to the 24th, there will be a new video. Keep an eye out for that. If you want to see those when they come out, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and like this video if you liked it. If you want to follow me on like my other book social medias, I will put those in the description. Hope you're having a good holiday season or just a good month in general. See you in the next one, which is tomorrow. So see you tomorrow.